The Forgotten Race. The year 50,000. The galaxy was vast, powerful, and ancient. Civilizations had risen and fallen, great empires had battled for dominance, and the stars had witnessed countless wars. But among the billions of species that rule the cosmos, there was one name that had faded into myth: humanity. Long ago, they had been a rising power. They had fought wars, built mighty fleets, and reached beyond their home system. But then, without warning, they had vanished. No trace, no explanation. The galaxy had moved on, and over time, humans became nothing more than a legend. Until now. The warning that no one believed. On Galos Prime, the capital world of the Tarkan Empire, Supreme Chancellor Thal stood before a massive holographic screen. A deep space sensor alarm had been triggered. A fleet was approaching the galactic core, a fleet of unknown origin. Varrock narrowed his reptilian eyes. Who dares enter Tarkan space without permission? His generals scrambled to scan the approaching ships. Their designs matched nothing in the galactic archives. They are unregistered. One officer hesitated. Unknown class. Unknown energy signature. Varrock growled. Unknown meant dangerous. Send them a warning, he ordered. If they do not respond, we will crush them. A transmission was sent. For several minutes, there was no reply. Then, at last, a message appeared on the screen. It was short. Simple. We have returned. Varrock felt a chill crawl down his spine. Because the message had been sent in flawless ancient galactic standard, a language that had not been spoken in thousands of years. The galaxy reacts. Within hours, news of the mystery fleet spread across the major empires. The Valeri Trade Union, the most advanced species in the galaxy, dismissed it as a lost fleet from an extinct race. The Exilvar Dominion, known for their brutal conquests, laughed at the idea of an ancient species returning. But in the deep archives of the Galactic War Council, an old historian, one of the few who still studied forgotten species, recognized the transmission. And when he did, his blood turned cold. These ships, their design, their energy signatures, he whispered, shaking. He pulled up the oldest records in the database, ones that had not been accessed in over 40,000 years. And there, he saw it. The last known image of a human warship. It was a perfect match. His voice trembled as he spoke to the council. It's them. Humanity has returned. The mystery of humanity's disappearance. The Galactic Council gathered for an emergency session. For thousands of years, no one had known what happened to humans. Some believed they had destroyed themselves in war. Others thought they had been wiped out by a greater force. But now, one thing was clear. They had never been destroyed. They had left. The question was, why? And even more importantly, why were they coming back now? First contact. The Tarkan Empire, unwilling to let an unknown fleet pass through their space unchallenged, sent their strongest warships to intercept. Hundreds of Tarkan battleships surrounded the unknown fleet, weapons charged. A Tarkan commander, a fierce warrior named Krevan, opened a channel. Unknown fleet, identify yourselves. You have entered Tarkan-controlled space. Any further movement will be considered an act of war. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the response came. The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing the face of a human. But this was not the humanity of legend. This human's eyes glowed with a strange light. His expression was calm, controlled, powerful. And when he spoke, his voice carried weight, as if it belonged to something far beyond mortal beings. We are not here to conquer, the human said. We are here to warn you. Krevan narrowed his eyes. Warn us of what? The human's expression did not change. Of what is coming. The hidden truth. The Tarkan officers exchanged confused glances. They had assumed these humans were primitive survivors, returning after millennia in hiding. But the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves, it was wrong. It was as if they had seen something the galaxy had never seen before. Creven sneered. You come back after 50,000 years and expect us to believe you bring a warning. From what? The human's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him. From the thing that made us leave. For the first time, the Tarkin commander felt fear. Because the humans had not returned as conquerors. They had returned as survivors of something far worse. And if they were afraid, then the galaxy should be too. The arrival that shook the stars. The Tarkin war fleet hovered like a wall of steel and fire, surrounding the mysterious fleet that had entered their space. Weapons primed, engines humming with energy, tensions on the edge of war. Yet the humans, if they truly were human, did not flinch. They stood calm in the face of superior numbers, their massive ships radiating an unknown energy. And their warning echoed through the Galactic Council chambers, spreading fear across the stars. We did not return to rule. We returned to warn you. But the empires of the galaxy had ruled for millennia. They feared nothing. They should have. The Council's doubt. On Velari Prime, the seat of the Galactic Council, leaders from across the galaxy gathered. Tensions were high. Could it really be true? Could humans have returned? High Chancellor Orvin, a being of crystalline energy, leaned forward. This must be a trick. No species vanishes for 50,000 years only to return with such power. The XL-VAR warlord, his armored scales reflecting the dim light, growled. If they are human, they are no longer the weaklings of old. Their technology, it rivals our own. A nervous ambassador from the Zephyr Collective, a species known for their intelligence, whispered, what if they speak the truth? What if something else is coming? Silence fell over the chamber. For the first time, in thousands of years, the rulers of the galaxy were afraid. A power beyond understanding. Back in the Tarkin war zone, the human commander stepped forward on the holographic transmission. His name was Commander Elias Varen. But there was something different about him. His eyes, they weren't fully human. They glowed faintly, like living stars trapped within his skull. The Tarkin commander, Creven, narrowed his gaze. You claim to be human, yet you look different. Elias remained still, unshaken. We are still human, he said, but we have seen what exists beyond your galaxy. And we have changed. The words sent a chill through the war fleet. For thousands of years, the great empires had believed they controlled everything, that the galaxy was theirs. Now, for the first time, someone was telling them otherwise. Creven bared his fangs. Changed. How? Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised a hand. A shimmering wave of energy pulsed from his body. Something neither machine or magic, something that felt alive. Every Tarkin warship's systems flickered. Energy shields collapsed for a brief second. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The Tarkin officers stared in shock. What? What was that? Elias's voice was cold. A warning. The first attack. Before Creven could respond, alarm screamed across the Tarkin fleet. A distress signal flashed onto the command screens. A Tarkin border colony, Argo 7, was under attack. Not by humans, by something else, by something unknown. The signal lasted only a few seconds before it went silent. Then came a final transmission, distorted, full of static, but still clear enough to freeze the blood of everyone who heard it. A Tarkin soldier's voice, shaking in terror. The stars are disappearing. Then silence. Creven turned back to Elias, rage in his eyes. What did you do? Elias shook his head. It wasn't us. It has begun. A truth that couldn't be ignored. The Galactic Council received the report within minutes. Argus 7 was gone. Not destroyed. Not invaded. Simply erased. No debris. No survivors. No record of what had happened. As if the planet had never existed at all. For the first time, the rulers of the galaxy understood. This was not a war. This was something worse. And the only ones who knew what was coming were the humans, the choice that would decide everything. On board the HSS Eternity, the flagship of the human fleet, Elias Varen stood before his officers. "They don't believe us," one of them said. "They still think we're the threat." Elias turned toward the view screen. In the distance, the Tarkin fleet was still watching, waiting for an excuse to attack. "They will," he said. "Soon." His second in command, a woman named Sarah Vale, exhaled. "If they don't, what then?" Elias's glowing eyes darkened. "Then we stand alone." The final message. The Galactic Council sent one final transmission to the human fleet. A single question. If this is true, if something is coming, how do we stop it? Elias's reply came instantly. "We don't." The council chamber fell into chaos. Before they could demand more answers, Elias spoke one last time. "You can fight us if you wish. Waste your fleets, waste your soldiers. But we have already seen the end of this war." He leaned forward. "And we are the only reason you still have a chance to survive it." The transmission cut off. The galaxy held its breath. Because for the first time, they realized humanity had not returned as conquerors. They had returned as the only ones who could stand against what was coming. The galaxy's fear. For the first time in thousands of years, the rulers of the galaxy faced something they could not understand. The humans had returned, not as conquerors, not as refugees. The meeting that changed everything. On Velari Prime, the council had gathered once again. This time, humanity was present. Elias Varen, standing tall in his deep black uniform, his glowing eyes unreadable, was flanked by other human commanders, each of them more advanced than any being in the room. He stood before the most powerful rulers of the galaxy, unshaken, unmoved. The Tarkin Emperor spoke first. "We have seen the signs, the disappearances, the warnings." He exhaled, his massive reptilian form tensed. "What are we facing?" Elias did not blink. His voice was calm, but absolute. "The end of your civilization." The room fell silent. The truth humanity had kept secret. For 50,000 years, the galaxy had assumed humanity had vanished. Now, they finally learned the truth. "We did not disappear," Elias said, pacing before them. "We left." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Elias continued, his voice like a blade cutting through their arrogance. "We reached the edge of the galaxy. We looked beyond." His glowing eyes locked onto the HFY warlord. "And we found something waiting for us." The horror from beyond. The holographic display flashed to life. A rift in space, pulsing with dark energy. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "This is what we discovered beyond the galactic rim," Elias said. "A force that does not conquer. It does not negotiate. It does not leave survivors." The Tarkin Emperor, usually fearless, felt a shiver run through his body. "What is it?" Elias turned to the display, his face unreadable. "We call it the Abyss, a war already lost." The hologram changed, showing ancient battle records, warships unlike any in the Council's database. "We fought them," Elias said, "thousands of years ago. We sent our strongest fleets, our greatest weapons." The hologram zoomed in, showing Earth's former warships engulfed in darkness, being erased from existence. "We lost." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. The galaxy had always believed it was the peak of power, the rulers of all existence. Now, for the first time, they saw the truth. They had never been prepared for what lay beyond the stars. The warning humanity gave before they left. Elias turned back to them. His expression hardened. 50,000 years ago, we had a choice. Stay and be destroyed, or leave and evolve. He gestured to himself, his glowing form, his people standing behind him. We became something greater. We became what we needed to be, to fight back. The HFY warlord, his arrogance cracking, growled, "Then why return now? Why warn us? Elias stared at him, his voice turning into ice. Because the abyss is already here. The attack on Velari Prime. Before anyone could respond, the room shook. Alarms blared, red warning lights flashing across the chamber. A Velari security officer rushed in, panicked. Abyss signatures detected on the outer edges of the system. Every screen in the chamber flashed with horror. A fleet of shadows, twisting, shifting, devouring the light itself, had appeared from nothingness. The Velari High Priestess staggered back in terror. It's not possible. The XLVAR warlord slammed his fists onto the table. Deploy the fleet. We will destroy them. Elias spoke a single word. No. The room froze. Elias turned toward the screens, his expression dark. You don't understand. Your weapons won't work. He pointed toward the battlefield, where Velari warships charged the enemy. Their energy cannons fired. Their missiles streaked through the void. Their shields flared. And then, nothing. The enemy did not dodge, block, or counterattack. They simply absorbed the attacks. The Velari fleet vanished in seconds. No debris, no wreckage, no bodies, only silence. The war had already begun, and the galaxy was already losing. The choice that would decide everything. The council watched in horror. The XLVAR warlord, usually ruthless, was silent. The Tarkin Emperor turned back to Elias. His voice no longer held arrogance. What do we do? Elias exhaled, his glowing eyes reflecting the war outside. You have two choices. Stand with us. His expression turned cold, final. Or die alone. The council did not hesitate. For the first time in history, the rulers of the galaxy bowed to a species they had once mocked, because they finally understood. Humanity had not returned to fight them. Humanity had returned to save them. And now, the war for survival had begun. The first counterattack. The Galactic War Council had never bowed to anyone. For thousands of years, they had ruled the stars, crushed rebellions, and wiped out entire species that defied their authority. Yet now, they stood in silence, watching their fleets vanish against an enemy they did not understand. The abyss had arrived, and their weapons, the pride of the galaxy, the peak of military technology, did nothing. No shields, no counterattacks, no survivors. For the first time in history, the rulers of the galaxy had to face a truth they never imagined possible. They were not the apex predators of the universe. Something else was, and the only ones who had ever survived it were the humans. The decision that changed the war. The Tarkin Emperor turned to Elias Varin, his scaled face unreadable. What do we do? Elias did not answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the massive screen displaying the battlefield, a graveyard of ships, entire fleets erased from existence. He exhaled, then finally spoke. You don't fight them the way you fight normal enemies. His voice was calm. You survive them. The XLVAR warlord clenched his fists. Survive? That is not an option. Elias locked eyes with him, and for the first time, the warlord felt small. It's the only option. Humanity's first strike. Across the battlefield, what remained of the Velari and Tarkin fleets struggled to regroup. But then, a fleet of black warships appeared from hyperspace. Ships with no markings, no identifying signatures, but each one sleek, efficient, and deadly. The galaxy had never seen these ships before, but they knew what they were. Human warships. For the first time, humanity entered the battlefield, and the abyss turned toward them. A battle unlike any other. Abyss ships did not act like normal war fleets. They had no formation, no coordinated attacks, no strategy, only devastation. They swarmed like shadows, stretching and bending as if reality itself was breaking. They did not fire weapons. They simply touched their targets, and ships vanished. The XLVAR and Tarkin commanders watched in horror. "This is suicide," one of them whispered. But Elias Varen stood tall, watching his fleet move without fear. Because unlike the rest of the galaxy, humans had fought this enemy before. They knew the rules of survival, and they had rewritten them. The power of adaptation. The human warships did not fight like traditional fleets. They did not hold formations. They did not rely on shields. They moved in erratic, unpredictable patterns, bending and twisting through space as if they were alive. Then, without warning, the first entropy torpedo was launched. It struck an abyss vessel, and for the first time, one of the shadows collapsed into nothingness. The galaxy watched in shock. They had never damaged the abyss before, but humans had. Elias Varen spoke into the open channel, his voice calm. "This is how you fight them." The galaxy's awakening. Across the war zone, alien commanders scrambled to analyze the human ships, to understand what was happening. "What are they using?" the Velari High Priestess demanded. One of her analysts, pale and trembling, answered, "It's not energy-based. It's, he swallowed hard. "It's a weapon that disrupts the very fabric of reality." The Xelvar warlord growled, realization dawning. "They are using the Abyss' own power against them." The Tarkin Emperor exhaled sharply, watching human warships move with deadly precision, taking down Abyss vessels one by one. For the first time, the Abyss was losing, and the galaxy finally understood why humanity had left for 50,000 years. They had not run. They had evolved. A small victory. For now, the Abyss fleet began to pull back, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but as if it was watching, learning. Human warships did not pursue, because they knew the truth. This was not a victory. This was just the first battle, and the Abyss was only testing them. The final warning. As the Abyss fleet retreated into the darkness, a single pulse rippled through space. It was not a signal. It was a message. Not in words, not in sound, but in thoughts, emotions, and raw understanding. And every being in the galaxy felt it at once. "We see you. We are coming." Elias Varen, standing on the bridge of the HSS Eternity, closed his eyes. He had heard those words before, and he knew what they meant. The real war was just beginning. The horror unleashed. The Abyss had never been stopped before. Not by energy weapons, not by planetary defenses, not by the greatest fleets in the galaxy. And yet, humanity had wounded it. For the first time in recorded history, the darkness had retreated. But this was not victory. This was only the beginning. Because the Abyss was not a mindless swarm. It was something worse. It was learning. The silence before the storm. The Galactic War Council gathered once more, shaken by what they had just witnessed. For the first time in millennia, their war fleets had been useless, and the species they had once mocked and ignored, humanity, had stood as the only line of defense. Chancellor Orvin, his crystalline body flickering with stress, looked at Elias Varen. "You wounded it," he said. "Does that mean we can kill it?" Elias didn't answer right away. He glanced at the star map, at the empty void where the Abyss fleet had vanished. Then he exhaled. "We don't know." Silence. The Tarkin Emperor growled. "What do you mean, you don't know? You fought this thing before." Elias turned to him, his glowing eyes unreadable. "Yes," he said, "and we lost." The truth of the First War. For 50,000 years, humanity had been silent. Now, they finally told the truth. "When we first encountered the Abyss," Elias began, "we thought it was a new species, something we could fight." A holographic display flickered to life, showing recorded battles from the First War, ancient human fleets fighting a losing battle against the Abyss. "We threw everything at it. Planet killers, reality disruptors, weapons that tore apart space itself." The Xelvar warlord watched as entire solar systems were consumed by the Abyss, their light snuffed out in an instant. And yet Elias said, no matter how many we destroyed, they kept coming. The Tarkin Emperor clenched his fists. Then how did you escape? Elias's voice was flat. We didn't. The first exile. The hologram change, showing the final moments of humanity's old empire. We realized too late, Elias said. The abyss doesn't just consume, it infects. The recording showed human warships twisting, their hulls breaking apart as something unnatural spread through them. One by one, their own ships turned against them. The room shook with tension. We had no choice, Elias said. We abandoned the galaxy. We fled beyond the stars. We let the abyss take everything, hoping it would stop. His eyes darkened. It didn't. The abyss evolves. Across the war-torn sector, sensors began blaring. Something massive was approaching. But it wasn't coming from outside the galaxy. It was coming from within. Human officers rushed to their stations, their voices urgent. Admiral, we have movement inside Tarkin space. No, across multiple systems. Elias's eyes widened. No, he whispered. It's too soon. The Velari High Priestess turned to him, her voice shaking. What do you mean, too soon? Elias turned toward the view screen. The map showed dozens of planets spread across multiple empires. And from each one, the abyss was rising. The infection had already begun. In the depths of Tarkin Prime, the heart of the most powerful military empire, an underground facility's alarms blared in panic. A research team had been studying wreckage from the battle. They had believed it was safe. They were wrong. The first scientist screamed as his shadow twisted and came to life. The next died seconds later, his body absorbed into the floor as if he had never existed. And then, the facility went dark. The enemy that cannot be stopped. The abyss wasn't attacking from the outside anymore. It was already inside the galaxy. Spreading, corrupting, taking over. It had never needed a fleet to invade. It had simply waited, because the first battle was never about winning. It was about learning. And now, it knew how to fight humanity. The final stand begins. Back on the HSS Eternity, humanity's flagship, the warning was clear. Elias turned to his officers. We don't have time, he said. The abyss has already adapted. The council watched, helpless, as reports came in. Planets falling, fleets vanishing, entire populations absorbed without a sound. For the first time, the galaxy itself was at risk of being erased, and there was only one choice left. Elias looked at the council, his face grim. We either stand together now, he said, or we die apart. The Tarkin Emperor clenched his fists. The Exelvar warlord bared his teeth. The Velari priestess whispered a silent prayer. Then, one by one, they nodded. For the first time in history, every species in the galaxy stood under a single banner, because they finally understood. This was not a war for power. This was a war for existence itself, and humanity was leading the charge. The war that changed everything. The abyss was no longer an outside threat. It was inside the galaxy, spreading, corrupting, erasing everything in its path. Entire worlds were going dark, their populations vanishing without a trace. The great empires of the galaxy, once rivals, once enemies, had no choice but to unite. And at the center of it all, leading the final stand, was the species they had once mocked and forgotten. Humanity, the United Fleet, a last hope. On board the HSS Eternity, Admiral Elias Varen stood before a holographic war map. Thousands of ships, drawn from every empire, had gathered in the largest allied fleet in history. Velari dreadnoughts, Tarkin war cruisers, Zelvar battle carriers, and in the center, human warships leading the charge. For the first time, the galaxy was no longer divided. For the first time, they stood together against a single enemy. But Elias knew the truth. This was not a battle they could win, not in the way they were used to, because the abyss was not an enemy that could be defeated by force alone. It was something worse. It was the end of all things, the battle for existence. The abyss did not attack with strategy or formation. It did not fire weapons. It consumed reality itself. The first wave of Allied warships opened fire, planet-cracking cannons, black hole generators, entropy torpedoes. They hit their mark. The abyss reeled back, entire sections of its dark mass collapsing into nothingness. For a moment, the fleet dared to believe they had a chance. Then, the abyss adapted. Its form shifted, its substance rewriting itself, absorbing the very nature of the weapons that had just wounded it. It evolved in real time. And the next wave of fire did nothing. The final strategy. Elias Varin clenched his fists. "They're learning too fast," an officer said. Elias's mind raced. He had seen this before. In the first war against the abyss, humanity had tried everything. Weapons, technology, science, magic. None of it had worked. Because the abyss was not a species. It was a force of nature. It was the collapse of all things into silence, which meant there was only one option left. Not to fight the abyss, but to trap it. The ultimate sacrifice. Elias turned to his officers, his glowing eyes unreadable. "We have to seal it," he said, "the way we did before." Silence. They all knew what that meant. The last time humanity had sealed the abyss, they had been forced to flee the galaxy. They had left everything behind. And now, Elias was suggesting the same thing. But this time, they would not be able to leave. Someone had to activate the seal manually. Someone had to stay behind. Elias took a deep breath. "I'll do it." The abyss trapped once more. As the battle raged, the HSS Eternity moved straight into the heart of the abyss. The other fleets fought to buy time, keeping the darkness at bay for as long as they could. On board, Elias and his remaining crew worked without pause, activating the ancient reality stabilizers, devices that could lock the abyss out of existence once more. But time was running out. The abyss was aware of what they were doing. It turned its full attention toward them, its whispers filling the comms. "You cannot stop what is inevitable." Elias ignored it. The final sequence was ready. A single button remained. With a deep breath, Elias activated the final seal. A pulse of pure energy erupted across the void. The abyss screamed. Its form began to break apart, fold into the prison that had been prepared for it. The fleet watched in awe as the darkness collapsed inward, disappearing into a single point of nothingness. Then, silence. The battle was over. The abyss was sealed once more. But the HSS Eternity was gone, and Elias Varin had vanished with it. The new era of the galaxy. The war was won. But the cost had been unimaginable. Entire worlds had been lost, countless lives erased, and humanity's greatest leader was gone. But in the end, the galaxy survived, and it never forgot who had led the fight. For the first time, humanity was no longer forgotten. They were no longer mocked. They were legends, and in the records of history, one truth would always remain. When the galaxy stood at the edge of oblivion, it was humanity that stood between existence and the void, and it was humanity that saved them all. END. Final impact. Massive, high-stakes ending. Humanity proves itself as the saviors of the galaxy. The abyss is sealed, but the cost is great. Elias Varin becomes a legend.